Hi, welcome back to the UPRAWR Podcast. Today's guest is Josh Mateo. We talk about how he got started working in music over 20 years ago, selling out shows before he even turned 18, and then getting an internship with Warner in Los Angeles. We talk about how he's now the current head of A&R at TikTok, and we talk about how he got there. Let's get into it.
I guess the place to start then is, how did you actually get into the industry and how did you start in music?
Well, it's quite a long story, and it starts from when I was quite young, actually. I first started off by playing in bands, like when I was super young, like literally between about the ages of 12 and 15.
Right.
I was playing in punk bands in Belfast, where I'm from originally. And through playing in those bands in and around Belfast and places like Dublin as well, that took me to booking concerts, gigs myself, so that I could get my own band on the lineup, right? So
Nice.
Through that
puts you ahead of most of the people that are in bands, just having the brains to do that.
Yeah, well, I did a lot of that in Belfast and Dublin when I was quite young, when I was like like I say, very young, like 12 to 15, I was playing in the bands. Then from about 16 to 18, I was booking shows, right? So they just got bigger and bigger. And by the time I went to university in England, and as I was getting a bit older, my tastes, developed a bit further and past punk into like indie rock and things like that when they were going on. So as I was in university in Liverpool, I went to LIPA, the music school. I continued on with my promotions and was booking shows throughout the city for my entire degree. That led me to booking concerts at Liverpool University in the O2 and the Mask, as it was called. Pretty big venues, between 1,500 and 5K cap by the time I was through with that. But the work has been, as a concert promoter, combined with my degree at the time, led me to getting an internship at Warner Brothers Records in Los Angeles.
Wow.
Yeah, when I was, it was a summer internship between second and third year of university. And from then onwards, I totally dropped the live industry and picked up the recorded industry. And I've never not worked for a record label since.
That's amazing. So I want to talk about the internship a bit, but before we get to that then, if you're promoting in 1,500 cap to 5,000 cap rooms, that's pretty high level stuff. And there's a lot of money involved in that. How did you sort of get that backed, and where did the money come from to hire the rooms and to pay the bands? And there's a lot going on at that scale.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, like, I think at that time I was booking a lot of shows that were maybe 200-300 cap, and they were all selling out. This is like almost like, for me at least, the golden age of like local indie. And I could walk away with like £600 a night in cash, myself as the promoter, everyone else being really well paid as the artists and otherwise. So when it came to things like booking venue hire for bit the larger shows, we were able to put down deposits and pay the rest off through ticket sales. Same goes for the in some cases we would pay an advance to the artist for the headlining slot and pay the rest of the acts and the rest of the overheads after ticket sales. The risk being that if the shows didn't sell, you got to find the money. That's maybe only, fortunately for me, it only happened once or twice that I had flops serious enough that went on, because you tend to cancel them if you're not selling the tickets. But I think it's just striking a balance between what your upfront costs and what you can kind of delay until you have some money coming in.
So with the bigger shows, were you booking through agents or working with?
Yeah, we were. I mean, I was a university student. I had my own company, and I was dealing with, at the time, agents from companies like Coda and William Morris and the Agency Group, which no longer exists, as well as a ton of just like local acts and artists who didn't yet have managers or didn't yet have agents. I think back then, if this was maybe like between, let's say 2008 and 2012, there was such a potent live scene. We've lost a lot of that since then because of, more and more venues closing. But, you used to be able to go to a show in any given city like Liverpool or Newcastle, Manchester, there could be 500 people there and not one of the acts playing even had a manager.
Yeah, it's just wild. I mean, that is so different to today,
isn't it?
To give people a little bit of context, like there are lots of promoters that have been promoting for 10, 15 years and they haven't reached actually the level that you were at. Like actually booking bands with the agency group and with William Morris is a big deal. Like that's high level shit. So to do that when you're in college is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's a funny one for me because I really, before leaving Northern Ireland and moving to England for uni, despite being like 18 or 19 years old, I already had like 3 years under my belt on like the DIY circuit.
I mean, you must have been ahead of every single other person on your course.
There were
like years ahead of every other person on your course.
The thing is, right?
You could have taught it.
I think there was a real. I'm so fortunate that at that stage in my life, I had that. I really did have an insane drive and necessity to be in the music industry. There was, not achieving a goal of a long-term career in the industry. It wasn't an option for me at that time. And it honestly carried me through a lot of harder times and like when things weren't so stable, internships or, not knowing whether you were going to get in once you finished uni. Those were highly speculative times. And also like looking back on that era of my life and of the industry, that was peak piracy. Like when I started and recorded music, that was like only just as Spotify was starting to become a thing, and the solution to piracy at that time was downloads, which it wasn't really happening. So when I first cut my teeth and recorded music, it was at a very grim time for that side of the industry. There were very, 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 very few jobs.
Yeah, I mean, getting the internship that you got is like a dream to most people, including me. So what sort of happened there? What did that look like with you going over to LA and doing that?
I had to undertake an internship as part of my university degree, and it was supposed to be from September to December. And it came around like April, May, and you should have really had that internship sorted out by then, but I hadn't really got lucky and I didn't really have anything.
And you could go to the tutor and say, I'm more successful than everyone else. So cut me some slack.
No, well, there used to be something called a J1 visa you can get to America that applied to undergraduate students who had a degree that could be directly relatable to the field of work they wanted an internship in. And I just started sending CVs around like major labels, and I honestly sent one to Warner Brothers Records through like through LinkedIn or something, and I got after months of getting absolutely no response, even from British companies, agencies, promoters, whatever. You couldn't intern for yourself, right? I got like an immediate call back from Warner Brothers Records in LA, and it turns out like they were actually looking for international interns to fill a certain quota. And so super, super lucky. And I did have some sort of tenuous connections out there with friends who played in, signed acts just from being a promoter and things like that. And I did get a couple of good words put in, and I got that role, I got that internship. And when it came time for me to go back to university, I was able to hustle a transfer. So from the LA office to the London office, fulfilled my actual module for university. And then when that wrapped up, I was able to hustle coming in for free for 2 days a week until the academic year ended. I'll never forget this. This is like one of the less glamorous sides of trying to break into the industry. From January to the end of my degree, which was pretty much like the end of May or maybe June, I got a train down to London at 6 a.m. from Liverpool on a Tuesday. Got into the office for like 9:30-ish, I think. And then I either stayed on a friend's sofa if I could find one, or in a hostel, literally in like a bunk bed in a dormitory. Went back into work the next day. I did 2 days a week, so like Tuesday, Wednesday, and then got the train back to Liverpool at 8 p.m. to Wednesday night for 6 months. And the money I had for those train fares came from like the savings I made from gigs.
That's amazing, man. I mean, I guess that really illustrates to people that if you want to fucking get into it, you've just got to make it happen. You've got to hustle. You can't expect to have everything fucking handed. And that sort of level of commitment is what gets you in.
It's 100%.
Like, there's so many people that will moan that they don't get in because they're not privileged enough. But that situation there that you've just described is you just fucking busting your balls.
It's just like failure wasn't an option, right? It was like busting my balls, like sleeping in fucking hostels for like crazy. Like, looking back on that, it's like almost an era I don't acknowledge enough. But like really that and don't forget, these were times when you interned for free, right? Yeah. You weren't getting paid. I was getting, like I think I got my train fare covered and things like that, maybe. But you weren't getting paid. These were unpaid internships. And that sort of border between being an intern, even the crossing from being an intern to an assistant was like the hardest line you could cross. But I crossed it eventually.
What was the actual work that you were doing? Like, I guess initially in LA.
Yeah.
And then over here.
I started out in LA and at Warner Brothers Records. I was a marketing intern. So some of the work I did when I joined the company was I was answering phones at the start, right? That was part of it. It was no way all of it, but you've no idea how stressful trying to transfer a call is on your first day of work, several thousand miles away from home with a funny accent. So I was answering phones. I was doing some of those things, but I actually did like to get involved really creatively in a lot of those marketing campaigns. And one of the most memorable things that I did out there in LA was Serge Tankian from System of a Down, right? He had an album out at the time called Harakiri. And I came up with the idea of creating, alongside 8 other interns, about 500 Google user accounts for YouTube, and we went throughout the entire landscape of YouTube, System of a Down, Slipknot, anything, whatever it was that was in some way relatable to Serge, and we commented on videos saying, "Did you guys know that he's got a new record out?" Like, "Oh yeah, I knew about that. It turns out it's only $4.99 on Amazon today." And we spent like 48 hours like mercilessly doing that across mainly YouTube, and I think it was genuinely the highest 24 hours of sales for a record on Amazon for Warner Brothers Records at that period of time.
That's incredible to think there's a company as big as Warner.
Yeah.
And it's like real, that's like grassroots level shit that you think people are doing like in their garage.
Yeah.
I mean, you're actually doing it, this massive corporation in LA.
Yeah, it was crazy. And like, let's not forget it was a long time ago. So like Amazon, CD sales online, things like that. This was really towards the end of that being a meaningful channel for consumption. CDs now, like, they're so much less in comparison to, let's say, streaming. But this was a long time ago. Things were done, I guess, differently. And that sort of guerrilla marketing angle, I guess, came at a time where people were really trying their best to find a way to reach an audience in a way that there's going to be a sale, right?
Yeah.
As we sort of came out that last little moment of the piracy era.
So what sort of year would that have been?
That was 2012.
2012.
So about, what would that have been, like 12 years ago?
What was the difference then, actually, before we come back to the UK, what was it just like being in LA at that time?
Oh, it was amazing, man. I think, like,
what was like the living situation, and whereabout were you in the city?
I lived in Westwood, which is like huge UCLA neighborhood. The UCLA campus is there. All the surrounding houses are student houses. I moved into an apartment where it was like what we call a flat share here, right? A flat share that had been organized for summer interns who were all interning the media industries, music or film. So I think it was like an empty UCLA dorm, like obviously being over summer.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
That's awesome. So how did you afford it? Was that all from promoters?
That was it wasn't all from promoter sales. Some of that I actually took out a student loan, maintenance loan, for third year, and the entire maintenance loan went towards flying out to LA.
Nice.
Yeah.
That is the best thing you could spend it on.
I think I only paid it back by 2 years ago.
So then when you did come back to the UK, did the role change? Did you do the same stuff over here? Or?
No, so when I moved to London, I became an intern at Warner Music International, and I was an international marketing intern. And then I very quickly became an international marketing and A&R assistant. And that was a combined role where I was looking at all of the global sales for the international team in multiple territories for US artists for every non-US territory, kind of a hybrid role. So international was a complicated department back then. You know, the UK office had an international department for American repertoire. So it was kind of like the US artists hit the UK office, and then the UK distributed it out to the rest of the world on a marketing level, that is. So the type of things I was doing there was helping develop the understanding of how artists' audiences are growing in different markets outside of the United States, like, you know, chiefly in Europe and Australia and other key markets like that, and coordinating the delivery of assets from the sourced signing territory into those markets and driving a combined global campaign for artists, and artists like Michael Bublé, the Black Keys, Deftones were some of the acts that I would have been involved in at that moment in time. But I also became, at that time in my career, an A&R assistant for one of, like, honestly, like the icons of 20th century A&R, Seymour Stein, which was still to this day is one of my greatest and most cherished moments and achievements in my career to date, is having even worked closely with Seymour at all. You know, don't get me wrong, like, a lot of the work was printing emails off and reading them out for him, and, you know, making him black coffees at 8 or 9 p.m. But Seymour Stein was the founder of Sire Records. He signed the Ramones and Madonna. He signed the Smiths in America, and tons of other artists. If you're not familiar with him, Google the guy. He's like, you know, some of his decisions are most likely in your playlists, right? So it was such a insane privilege for Seymour Stein to be the guy who got me into A&R. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he was a great guy, and a highly influential role he played in the development of my career.
How long are you with him for?
Seymour I worked for him for the entirety of being at Warner Music International. So that was about 1 year. But I went off to Sony for like a year and a half, and then I went back to Warner.
And was that doing similar sort of stuff?
Well, yeah. So when I was at Sony, I did international. So I did, like, I stuck through that sort of international marketing role for a little while longer. It was a little more circumstantial. Again, like, it was definitely a time where jobs were super hard to come by. So when I moved over to Sony, I was working across a ton of artists, like Liam Gallagher. Liam Gallagher had a short-lived project called BDI at the time.
Yeah.
I worked across that. I worked across the Vaccines and Ollie Moores, One Direction, even artists like Little Mix as well. This was like peak X Factor era for Sony too. Right. This 2013-ish, sort of 2013-14.
So what did a campaign look like for someone like that? Like, how would it be put together? And
it's funny because when it comes to global superstars, the insane level of lean in from a major label or their release partners, it's so hard to actually, you know, underestimate the level of work that goes into developing global superstars and maintaining their schedules. a lot of the work from the international marketing department at Sony at that time, I was spending a large portion of my day monitoring calls that, the individual members of 1D might have had with, journalists from Brazil or Mexico or Australia or whatever, and just making sure like they're not running over time, or, maybe not asking questions that were on the list, things like that. Again, similarly to Warner, I was also in charge of tracking chiefly iTunes chart positions across multiple territories. Sort of very, very administrative stuff, data-driven audience analytics, I suppose, before they were packaged into aggregated softwares. So like going through different charts one by one and logging the daily position.
So much there.
Yeah.
Using like One Direction as the example then, when you're looking at that international level of the interviews and what they have to do and all the commitments that they get lumped with, how much of that is just the label making decisions and then letting them know this is what the next 6 months looks like, and how much of it is them actually getting involved and taking an active role in that? Because thinking about all the different countries and all the different things that stuff's happening in, is it different shit in each country, or is it all sort of like there's one campaign and each country gets sort of the same thing?
I think it's dependent on the opportunity at hand, and whatever moves forward as the campaign is really between any artist's management representative and the label to solidify. So it might be that the label or even an external member of the team, like a TV plugger, may have found a run of opportunities that might complement, let's say, the radio pluggers' routing of opportunities across 5 markets, while an artist happens to be on tour in Europe or otherwise. You sort of build out these global campaigns in and around live, or the other way around. You might have a run of TV appearances, and so radio piggybacks off the top of that. But I think in general, it's definitely a combined pool from multiple departments that are all sort of working towards one goal.
So many moving parts in that. I'm trying to imagine actually being in the middle of it and trying to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, right, it's like, let's say you've got a global artist. They're going on tour in Europe. That requires one booking agent, one artist manager, tour manager, multiple concert promoters. But you want to do promo everywhere you go, right? So there you got to have a radio plugger plug in the record in those markets, and if they're able to land an interview, then they got to coordinate the artist going into the station for the interview. You might have a TV plugger doing the same thing so that they can go in for televised interviews. You might even also have a press agent, like getting, interviews for online press or print press as well. You got to coordinate the artist's time effectively to be able to fit all of that in, as well as the actual tour itself, right? And then you got the label trying to make sure that at all times, they're plugging the record the right way and the right times and pointing audiences to the right sales message or whatever it is. And so that's, this whole world where all of the artists' success gets rolled into one, right? They're playing a show, maybe they're playing a stadium event at the same time as like having a #1 record or something. But it's moments like that then you see like the vastness of requirement from an artist's team to maintain that level of superstardom.
Yes.
And that's where I came in, and all I did to contribute was make sure the marketing managers knew what the iTunes chart position was in Bulgaria for that day.
How much of that do you get to see as an intern?
Looking back, I think
were you learning more as an intern than you were in university?
Yeah, I gotta be honest. I say I actually did. I studied management, music business management at LIPA, which is a music school in Liverpool. It's a great place, fantastic place, and to be surrounded at that age by, people who are so interested in developing a career in music as an artist or executive that they've chosen to study, that's where the benefit comes from. But it's an industry that's hard to be taught, right? It's like, how do you teach something without practice, theory versus practice? You got to have both. So I think would I have gotten to the place where I was even an intern had I not done a degree like that? Maybe not, because of the butterfly effect. But I do think learning on the job is the only way forward in the music business, because actually, you kind of just, I don't think it's such an informal industry. There is no, you don't have to have a qualification to be in the business. It's not like being a lawyer or an accountant, which leaves it open to interpretation based on who's managing you at the time, who your boss is or what particular label you're at. And it's also like, it's such a fluctuating industry, like things change all the time.
When you left Sony and went back to Warner, was that doing the same sort of role?
Well, no, that was when I moved back to Warner, I was able to actually fall a little bit back into A&R on the basis that I was working across ADA and East West Records doing A&R and digital, which was in and around a time where distribution started to become a little bit more of a known entity and offering for artists of any levels. Prior to, like, I'd say 2014, at least in the UK, distribution was sort of looked at as this back office administrative deal that major labels maybe do with superstars who are out of a deal or something. No one really quite knew what it was. But I think I was definitely involved in distribution at a time where the lines between frontline major label and distributor started to become more and more blurred. And I think the movement that really helped to usher distribution through as a known offering, a credible offering for artists, was the UK hip hop and rap space. Like artists like Stormzy really led the charge in being able to be an independent artist with a team around them that could help, deliver national or international campaigns.
Was that through Ditto?
Stormzy's first record, Gang Signs and Prayer, was through ADA, which is a part of Warner. Ditto has a lot of UK hip hop and rap acts go through their system for sure. That particular record from Stormzy was at ADA.
ADA for the digital distribution.
Mm-hmm.
Did ADA start as that, or did they start as physical distribution?
I should know more about this than I do. I'm pretty sure they started as physical distribution, actually.
Yeah.
This digital distribution, I guess, was, only a thing from 2000 plus onwards.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. No, I'm sure they probably were physical first, but don't quote me on it. I don't know.
What would the benefit be to a band to look for a distribution deal over going to a record label?
I think when you're doing a distribution deal, they're often shorter term. They're mostly licensing agreements, so therefore you get your masters back after, let's say, 5 years or 10 years. It greatly varies the amount of lean-in you might get and help you might get from the distributor, but I often find that with distributors, they do provide, let's say, funding for the artist and their team to find a radio plugger or develop their assets, get a music video made, things like that. And many distributors do have teams now that look no different to that of a major label or an independent label. Marketing managers, digital marketing managers, A&R people, and otherwise. So why would you give away all of your royalties, let's say, or sign a really, really, really long-term deal at the very start of your career if you can sort of get the same lean-in from a team on a much shorter-term deal where the royalties might be heavily in your favour?
Could you explain the difference a little bit with if you sign to a label and you're giving away your masters? What actually does that mean? What is giving away your masters?
I think these days it's very hard to come across deals that are in perpetuity and therefore the record label owns the master for life. I do think it tends to now be about 20 to 25 years. I'm not sure what option periods do look like these days, but in general, if you were to use the major labels as an example, generally speaking, you might sign a multi-album deal for an advance. You get paid a certain advance, and the record labels will decide the marketing budget that's recoupable against the project that you so in essence you've got to pay it all back before you make a royalty, and then your royalty would usually be between 18 and 22% once the label is broken even. So that would be a typical major record company deal today.
So with your distribution one, you're not having to worry about any of that. You have to record your own stuff.
A typical distribution deal, might be 80% royalty in the artist's favor on a 3 or 5 year license, with a much lower advance, if any advance, and a much lower marketing commitment, but I think probably a fixed marketing commitment, so you know what's being recouped. So a lot of the time it's the difference in upfront resource financially.
So when you decided to leave Warner, why did you do that?
I'd been at Warner Music Group for about 8 years, my second time around, and I was heavily involved in the development of data-driven A&R research in the UK company. A lot of the data-driven behavior of A&R people at major labels or otherwise over, let's say, the past 6 or so years, it's based on TikTok, right? Like TikTok have played a huge role in, being a platform where the consumer ends up deciding what records are being carried through naturally and organically.
Yeah.
That's led to data-driven A&R people acquiring certain softwares, analytical offerings that can help break down what's happening around new music discovery. But with that, comes every A&R in the UK or otherwise being able to see the exact same thing at the exact same time, which for a long time I think led to really, really hyper competitive environments around artists that may have just had like a viral moment for a couple of weeks, and the record gets signed for more than it's worth, and the mood's off from the start because the people have had to overpay to win a deal because it's so hard out there. They're desperate to have something that looks like it has a pulse, right? It doesn't work. It does not work for the artist or the A&R executive or the label that they represent, because it tends to leave development in a place where people are chasing one moment rather than the development of an artist's long-term career. So I think for me, I'd been in major labels for well over a decade by the time I did leave Warner, but I think that I definitely was in a place where I was looking to be able to, I would say, capitalize on my actual knowledge of A&R research and the journey of a hit record and the journey of an artist's career and development on that data side, as well as, I've been in the studio as many times as any other traditional A&R people, but I've done both. So I just felt like the industry was moving in a way that I wanted to be a part of. So this role at TikTok, we're launching an artist and label services offering in order to enable the artists coming through their platform to be able to distribute their records. I just wanted to be at the start of something for once, and so it just felt like an opportunity. Given my background in both traditional and data-driven A&R, it felt like an interesting move for me.
When you say it out loud, it seems really obvious that actually TikTok doing that makes sense, because so many people are breaking on TikTok, but then their songs aren't out anywhere else. So TikTok's facilitated them becoming known, might as well facilitate the songs being available. Until you actually say it out loud, it doesn't seem that obvious.
I think that genuinely, the reason TikTok wanted to provide this offering was for artists, who were just on the platform, developing audiences. They just wanted to genuinely make it easier for users to reach audiences, and if that meant providing them with a service that was able to get their music onto DSPs, and that's what SoundOn is, right? But with that comes probably the need for practitioners like myself and my colleagues to come in from other spaces of the industry and help develop a routine for that offering, and assistance to those artists coming through.
So what actually is your job then? Because you're A&R at SoundOn.
Yeah. So I'm the head of A&R for SoundOn in the UK and Europe, which means that I'm by and large responsible for what artists that we provide deals to on our highest level, but also I work very closely with our wider team across developing campaigns for our signed artists and helping different markets develop things like that. But SoundOn is an artist and label services offering that, and being the head of A&R for that company, it's really not very different to should I have been at any other music distributor or label.
So who are some of the artists that you've worked with?
To date, we've done, we've had really great moments with artists like Disco Lines, Rain Radio, Leo Stay Trill, Alan Walker, Sideman. Gosh, so it's always a hard one to try and list off, but we got a ton, like Potter Paper, M. Juancho, Craig David, Wes Nelson. We got great acts in Chloe Adams, Grace Cashew. We're still quite new, so we're very much developing our roster, but we've already had, I think it's either 4 or 5 chart positions in the UK.
If you've got one of those artists, do they do better on TikTok for being with SoundOn?
I think it would naturally we would sort of gravitate naturally towards artists who use the platform or lent in on TikTok. It's definitely not a requirement. I think that if an artist has an audience everywhere but TikTok, then it's as much of a reason for us to want to be involved, because we're like, look, we can develop your voice in the platform and help you with your best practice in the platform, meanwhile servicing your artistry and your music everywhere else at the same time.
If it's an artist that's not actually A&R'd and signed properly, can they still come to you and get the services?
Yeah, we've got multiple tiers to our offering, and you can sign up to SoundOn as an open service platform for 100% of your royalties. So that's an offering accessible to anybody.
Was there a moment that you remember where TikTok became an obvious player?
Yeah.
There was a point where it was it tipped and it was shit, we need to pay attention to this. As in the music industry needs to pay attention.
Yeah, there was for me. I sort of knew what TikTok was. I came across this artist at the time called Georgia Twin, who had, what was the name of the record? I came across this artist called Georgia Twin who was doing a lip sync to a track called Hit or Miss.
Right.
And I think I came across it because she was her Instagram followers were starting to go crazy, and somehow I found that, and then I could see that it was a rip, whatever was going on Instagram, her content was a rip from TikTok. So I downloaded TikTok and I looked for Georgia Twin, and without really knowing what TikTok was, I could see that this young artist had 200,000 followers on TikTok and the same again on an engagement on her posts. I was like, what's going on here? So we invited Georgia in for a meeting, and I'm pretty sure she did. Yeah, she did a deal with EMI. We didn't sign her in the end, but
this is when you
this was when I was at Parlophone. But
when were you at Parlophone?
I was at Parlophone right before TikTok. Parlophone's Parlophone's a Warner label. So when I said I was at Warner, I was at Parlophone.
Okay.
I was at ADA, then I went to Parlophone, all under the one banner of Warner Music Group. Anyway, that's how I found. That was my first encounter with TikTok. Was through that artist Georgia Twin, and working backwards, finding the platform that way, and from there on, it was from there, that moment onwards, 95% things were coming through TikTok. You know, that I was involved in the Wellerman conversations, you know, and that record with Nathan Evans was kicking off. You know, that was probably one of the biggest moments in A&R change, you know, moments where we as a community, I think A&R community in the UK or anywhere else, sort of realized things have really changed now. Just the way that record came about, how it was signed, the nature of the track, the nature of the sonic. And there have been countless examples ever since.
How long before you moved to TikTok was that?
The first one, 4 years. 3 years, 4 years. I also signed a record when I was at Warner that was briefly the most used sound on the platform. That was Jenny by the Studio Killers. Like, I think in 2019 had like 2 billion views or something.
It's wild.
So I was kind of like
blow up.
I was kind of involved in that side of A&R prior to joining TikTok, and I suppose that's probably why I ended up there, right?
Are there any particular campaigns at TikTok that you've really helped build, and sort of what goes into putting one together?
Yeah.
Is TikTok a huge part of your campaign because it's SoundOn, or?
I think it is. I think it you know, we definitely develop campaigns on the platform, not exclusively, but like because we are powered by TikTok, we're thinking about TikTok first strategies a lot. You know, and campaigns that I've been directly involved in. One of the most recent ones I can think of is Pink Lemonade by Leo Stay Trill. It's a track that's done, I think, about 35-40 million streams in its first 8 or 9 weeks that we're in now. So that's about 1 million streams a day, cross-platform, multiple DSPs. So, you know, a lot of what we did there, it was like definitely developing campaigns on the platform. Artists, you know, and influencers like Dave or, you know, Bella Porch, some of the biggest TikTokers or artists in the world have used the sound in the past month. We've done a lot to drive audiences meaningfully towards the sound and help Leo the act develop his own audience whilst doing so on the platform. But like in no way have we neglected any other spaces. We've done billboards across London. We've very much serviced the record meaningfully to radio and DSPs as well. And the marketing and promo team have done an excellent job in developing international campaigns for that particular track too, in the US and in Australia and other markets that showed early signs of promise and connectivity.
Is this sort of like an internal conflict of thought, where you mentioned earlier that people were getting signed because of going viral and there not actually being that much value in it because it's a fleeting moment? Is when you're looking at this stuff, you're thinking, okay, we need to get that viral moment, but also we need to acknowledge that viral moment might not be long-term success, but it's important in the moment. Like, where's that line, and where do you approach it from?
More and more music companies, whether they're distributors or independent labels or major labels, are signing artists on one single deals. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that if an artist is having one of those viral moments, you know, their demand goes up from those companies, and they can offer them a lot of money for the track, and that suits the act, right? Because like, oh yeah, sure, you know, I'm happy to capitalize on the moment, which means that the market is played that way, right? So in order to compete effectively, you've got to almost fall into the expectation of, let's say, the current climate around artist managers and lawyers and what they're expecting for their artist. And that's not always a 3-album deal. They might see from their point of view the benefit of a big payday for one single, then they're free, or a very short-term deal on that basis. But what it does mean is that regardless of who you are signing an act, you better make make it work, right? If I'm spending a ton of money on one single, then that my whole universe in the context of that artist is that one single. Yeah. And so I think that's just how it is right now. I don't know if there's anybody to blame, or if it's bad or if it's good. I do think it's probably just a symptom of media itself being kind of condensed down into, you know, much shorter entities, and that goes for people's attention spans, right?
Absolutely.
It's not only that, it's like one single deals, like, you know, if you want to watch something on TV, you're flicking through 5 different subscription services to pick something.
Yeah.
The variety on each is ever growing too, which means your ability to pay attention to any one entity is continuously shrinking.
Yeah, absolutely. How crucial do you think TikTok is in breaking somebody? Like, are they going to break if they're not on TikTok?
Over the past couple of years, I can see hard evidence that TikTok as a platform is enabling artists and communities to find a voice and deliver meaningful, you know, outreach musically in a way that wasn't necessarily possible before. I could almost describe it as like a democratization of music. The platform provides artists with their ability to reach an audience, an indiscriminate audience, to the point in which I sort of feel like if you are good enough, and if the records are good enough, and if you're able to find a way to communicate your artistry to an audience that makes them pay attention, then for all intents and purposes, you should be okay with TikTok. So I do think that the platform has taken us as an industry to a place where there are no gatekeepers. Like, TikTok isn't a gatekeeper. TikTok has removed gatekeepers, I think, from audiences. So it's just an app that people live on. So therefore, I do find it to be a tremendous asset to artists for that reason.
If you've got somebody that you're looking to sign and they don't have a TikTok, they're not using it, and you're looking at it, as you said, like, this is an opportunity to get their fan base onto the platform, what would be the process of you trying to put together a TikTok campaign? Because surely, like, the best people on the planet for putting together a TikTok campaign is going to be TikTok.
It's not an unfair assumption, I don't think. I think it's totally dependent on what stage this. I mean, if this artist is at, what stage the artist is at. Are they a global superstar who don't have TikTok, or an artist who doesn't have anything? I think it definitely depends on the situation, but, you know, we can hopefully help deliver audiences in a way that, you know, we work with our artists on best practice and how to get their, you know, first 2 feet on the ground with the platform, find their voice, whether that's, you know, coaching them through how regularly they should post or what they should post. You know, we can give advice on that and help them realize their own vision for how they want to get their voice across on the platform. I think from there, it's just nurturing the process and, you know, being a helping hand for them when they have any questions as to how to get the most out of it.
Is there a rule of thumb on how often they should be posting?
I think, like, most of the artist partnerships and label partnerships teams tend to suggest 2 or 3 times a week. But again, it's like, it's totally dependent on the situation at hand and how the artist has nurtured an audience to that point.
Are there any artists that you've personally A&R'd that have blown up that you're just like, this is my one? Like,
it's A&R'd is a term I think that's changing, because, you know, when I was growing up, A&R'd really meant, what it really meant was you're putting that artist into writing sessions, you're putting them through 3 or 4 producers before finding one that you and they are happy with. You know, you've spent 6 months writing demos, and you've out of that got maybe 2 options for a track to release, and, you know, you as the A&R handing the producer 5 sets of notes before it moves on to the mixer, and same again. That honestly doesn't happen as much anymore. I think A&R in 2024 often means signing acts, right? Then those acts may have already got the track out that you're wanting to sign. So have I A&R'd any artists that have taken off in during my time at SoundOn? Yes, in so much as I've signed the acts and I've spotted them as, you know, an artist I wanted to be involved with. I have done, notable records like the Leo State Trill track I mentioned before, Pink Lemonade. That's doing really well. I was involved in signing that project, which was it came in as a freestyle brand called Reloaded. Other records I've picked up since being at the company, there's a huge variety, but other ones that were maybe chart positions were Sidemen. That was a number 3 record, Christmas Drillings. Craig David and Wells Nelson, that was a top 40 record. The M. Honcho and Potter Paper mixtape, it's a top 40 record. But a huge amount more, it's not, for me, it's definitely not about UK chart positions. I think it's all about tasteful credibility in the music as well as global reach, as much as it is about UK chart positions.
How important is it to TikTok as a company that SoundOn is finding people that are successful and brings in money to the distribution? And where's the line with them just being like, this is just a great thing that we're able to provide, and where is it like, this needs to fund itself and actually be a successful enterprise?
The task we have at hand as SoundOn is to be really a support service to the industry, whether it's an artist or a label. Our job as a distribution entity is to provide a helping hand to our partners. Given that we're powered by TikTok, we're in a space where we can give the most expertise and lean into how to best get the most out of our platform. But I think that we're empowered to retain audiences. That's really, how we find satisfaction in working with great artists. It's by helping them reach their own audiences and, helping ourselves as a platform keep great culture flowing through us.
Slightly different question then. If you could go back and relive a point in your career, when would you want to go back to?
That's a really interesting question. Maybe all those times I should have signed the records, that turned out to be giant hits. Go back in time with the knowledge you still have.
Are there any you missed then that you're like, fuck?
What did I miss? I think there's a few things that I brought it. It's an interesting question. There are a ton that I've missed, but we all have. It's not only because it's not so much that you missed them, but you didn't win them, right?
Yeah.
We didn't always have I haven't always had the big. It takes a lot of money sometimes, and some people are willing to spend mercilessly when others aren't. But I think, for me, the greatest time I've ever had in this business, was that probably when I was at the very start of my career, when it was all ahead of me, and
So
the record industry was so different back then. First and foremost, outside of pop music, the mainstream was rock, right?
Yeah.
And I was, so therefore you had rock executives, and it was crazy. People were just, you were going to a show every night of the week. Every night of the week you were at a concert with your colleagues, having as much fun as you possibly could, going to see artists that you grew up listening to. Given that I was 21.
Yeah.
That was a cool time.
Was there any moments when you were in that time where, in reflection, you hadn't made it at that point, but you were stood there thinking, fuck, I'm there. No way. As if I'm in this room.
I think those moments can come around every now and then. When I first moved to London, it was only about 2 years in where I actually had a permanent job. That, first year was these crazy unpaid internships or temp roles, or rolling 3 months with Sony or whatever it was. But I've had some, every now and then you get some moments that you're like, oh shit, yeah, you know what? I have made it, or I am 10 years into this. Or you're sitting in an awards ceremony and you're like, shit, this Tuesday night and I'm here. Or you watching one of the acts that you've signed sell out Kentish Town Forum 3 nights in a row, which I had at Mother, which was one of the last acts I worked with before leaving Warner. There are great moments. They come around every now and then to remind you that, you know, you're doing pretty okay. Yeah. But I can't really single one out, you know. It's interesting. It's a really interesting question. I think there's more to do there. I'll be able to come back to you in 10 more years.
What do you think the next 10 years looks like for you then?
All I want out of my career is to be able to continue to have a meaningful role in the development of great artists, whether they're in the UK or otherwise, and hopefully have an accurate steer on culture in a way that can complement my decisions as an A&R.
I think we've pretty much covered everything. So before we finish, is there anything you want to mention or any bands you want to plug? Or
No, I think we're all good. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you for coming on, having the chat, man. It's been fascinating. I really enjoyed it.
Likewise.
Thank you to everyone that's listened. We are available on YouTube if you want to watch us. Please like, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts.